We're going to commence the next session on this hotspot. And let me introduce the topic for this. I'm Sam from LearningMate. And the topic is, what do Pokemon Go, alt text, and big data mean for education? So just to give you a context of this topic, I mean, this is not specifically to discuss what Pokemon Go means, but Pokemon Go is like a placeholder for all the disruptions that's happening in the industry today, as far as technology goes. Pokemon Go was a disruptive thing that happened in the gaming industry. It kind of changed the way games are thought of, made, and will be made in the future. Similarly, there are a lot of trends in education that are happening, a lot of technology adoption that are shifting grounds, and we're going to talk of some of them. And to talk of that, I have with me three distinguished guests on this dais. And let me make very brief introductions because we've just got half an hour, but many of you probably know them. I have with me, just to my right here, Craig Bauer. Craig is the Chief Global Operating Officer for Macmillan Springer Nature Education. The group is a leading provider of language learning, curriculum, higher education, instructional materials, with sales in over 80 countries and operation in 16 countries. And Craig looks after all of that. Jim Donohue, the gentleman sitting at the extreme other end. Jim is the Executive Vice President and Chief Product Officer of Cengage Learning, a leading educational content technology and services company for the higher education and K-12 professional, library, and workforce development markets worldwide. Jim oversees the development, ideation, and creation of all of Cengage's learning products. And in the center, I have Joan O'Neil. Joan is Executive Vice President of Knowledge and Learning for Wiley, a global provider of knowledge and knowledge-enabled services that improve outcomes in areas of research, professional practice, and education. Joan is responsible for leading Wiley's knowledge services, learning solutions, and professional practice and learning businesses. And you could not have a more high-powered panel to share with you their views on this. Just to introduce what we're going to discuss, I'm just going to give a prelude to this and talk about, some of the questions that we could throw open to the panel. So education is adopting technology at an unprecedented pace, and if you look at what has happened in the industry, a lot of capital, whether it's private equity or venture funding capital, has flowed into the industry, creating new companies, and it's unprecedented flow of capital over the last few years. And in the edtech space, this has never been so active. If you have noticed, very recently, LinkedIn bought lynda.com some 1 or 2 years earlier, then LinkedIn got acquired by Microsoft. And all this has something to do with what's going to be happening in the future of education, and how players like Microsoft, Google, and others would kind of come in. So in terms of technology adoption, education is perhaps where the banking industry was 30 or 40 years back in terms of technology adoption. But we are climbing the curve. But what is good about it is we are climbing with the latest and the best. So there's a technology leap that's happening here. So my first question is, in this entire global landscape where technologies are shifting fast, mergers and acquisitions are happening, players who we never thought would be education players are trying to get into that space. As you are designing for this ever-changing environment, what is your approach to product design? So I'd kind of give this question for all three of you to respond very quickly in line, and then how do you design products in this environment, and how futuristic are they, how future-proof are they, how global are they? I mean, this is what the first question could be.
Hi, good morning. In terms of product design, one thing we see in education that's different than segments like STM or more recently perhaps trade is there isn't really the direct electronic substitution of a physical product like it was in those segments. So in the STM market, certainly subscriptions were sold early on in the 90s, certainly through the 2000s. And the unit demand for the physical product started to correlate and decline over time as the consumption was digital. Same thing happened with the trade segments that a lot of publishers represented here are in between 2009 and 14, where some saw their unit demand fall as much as 50%. In education, though, the marketplace is voting with their wallets, and their requirements are for a blended product. They want deep contextual product, typically in text. They want diagnostics and assessments and repetitive skill learning in digital because it gives the student or the learner immediate feedback, right, which is where the value proposition often is. So the design is becoming more blended. It has become more blended. The ability to state learning outcomes at the beginning for students to be able to track their own progress individually, for teachers to be able to monitor that progress and intervene. All of those factor into whether they select, our products competitively.
Hi, welcome everybody. So it's an interesting time and a real opportunity for publishers and also for students and customers of our products. And I would say the biggest change that we're seeing is a real ability to design a product based on user and customer feedback and really study how our students are engaging in already the content that we produce. Think about it where, the days of the textbook where it was just a body of knowledge, and now it is really, as we just discussed, around those learning objectives that are built into the courses that ultimately deliver better outcomes. And so we can study now that usage like we've never been able to before, and then develop the tools that our students are looking for. So it's important that we not get ahead of what the customer is looking for, that we're in line with what they're looking for, and we're not over-engineering before they're ready. So I agree, we're currently in this blended learning environment, but it's very quickly accelerating towards digital, ultimately to deliver a better experience for the customer, which is to have deliver better learning outcomes. So that goes into the design methodology. I'd also say one other point is that it's really important that we embrace more of an agile development process so we can pivot faster, we can base it on customer feedback, versus what we used to do years ago where it was more of a waterfall approach. Those take multi-years to develop. You're often not in touch with the customer. That's how you get to an over-engineering situation. So again, that agile kind of pivoting methodology where we're iterating constantly with customer feedback is really essential towards our future.
Hi. Everything they've said is of course sort of falling through to the organization industry. I think the two things for us, most importantly, is we've really, like Wiley and I think Macmillan, we've completely reverted our sort of development process to be very student-focused, less instructor-centric. And our goal now really is to look at how outcomes of our content and our platforms drive better performance for students. And that's really what we've been putting almost 100% of our focus on. The other thing is we've been looking at flexibility, which has become very critical to us. We've changed the way we create our content and the way we change our platforms. Platforms become the content, the diagnostic has become the content, the analytics has become the content, and we've been very good about creating sort of free forms of our content and tying it to learning objectives and then setting it free. We've invested millions of dollars in a content management system which takes all of our content now to a paragraph level, and what it allows an instructor to do is to pull content tied to learning objectives from a multitude of sources, not just one text or one product. And as a result, it really frees up our content in a really unique way and still rewards our authors or our subject matter experts who are creating it. So for us, that flexibility is really important. And we've gotten so flexible that this year we're going to launch 20 open educational resource products. All open, come from open source. All the content is royalty and permission free. And we've put it on our platform because for us that platform becomes the content differentiator and the curation. And so that's for us. It's that flexibility and that student focus of giving people what they want, just like I think my colleagues.
Thank you for that response. My next question is, it's a technology disruption question. So I was at an exhibition more recently, and there was this Google guy sitting in a booth. And I walked up to him and I asked him about adaptive learning in education. So he started smirking at me. And he said, you know what, we've spent billions of dollars developing all these algorithms of personalization, of adaptive learning, of, Google has all of it. And, what I'm seeing in the exhibition is, one generation or two generations behind. And I asked him that, are you seriously thinking of getting all that you have into the education domain? How interested are you? How serious are you? And the answer was evasive, but suppose someone like Google came in with all the technology, innovation, personalization technology, search algorithms, all of that, that adapts to, the student these things. All the investments that we are making in the technology platforms today in education, where does that stand? I mean, if that disruption really happens.
There's a lot of platforms, Google, Microsoft, Intel, that are highly focused in this market, in this industry, in many of the markets that we serve. I come across them in Southern Africa, in Australia. And so they have certainly a capability that can be very disruptive. There's one thing I would say, and it gets back to Joan's comment about over-engineering the product. We sell into decision bodies, private or government, and we often meet requirements of a tender or an RFP. And there is a check-the-box, a bit of approach to meeting those requirements. But then awards are given, and we'll have share, and share will move across these companies. But when it gets down to the teacher and the teacher management in that classroom, the utilization, the usage of those technologies that are in that tender is quite starkly different. And the key differential, in my opinion, is the amount of investment that we put into professional development to teach the teachers how to use these tools.
No, I agree. I'd also say that, this is where you have to have the combination of the content paired with the right technology. So it's no longer that a technology can come in and just disrupt on its own if it's not tied to that great content that these professors, faculty, students have used for many years. The course that they're using often doesn't change in terms of the teaching material. So in order to come in with a disruptive technology, it has to be paired with, again, that objective, that learning objective. So I think it's important that, Jim talked a little bit about how you define content. Content is no longer just a body of knowledge, right? And so you have to really think about it in the broadest sense. And so as publishers, over the years, many of us probably did over-engineer at a particular time. And what we're finding is that you do have to deliver in a more open standards way now. Many of our universities globally are using learning management systems to deliver their courseware. We have to make sure that our courseware connects with ease into those organizations. Again, we have to make it simple for the end user in order to deliver the best outcome. So the technology alone will not be able to deliver that great experience. It really has to be paired with the content and the learning objective.
I totally agree, but I also think that a lot of these technologies are things that we're taking advantage of. So Google, to me, is not an enemy. We've integrated Google search into all of our K-12 library product, and we've seen an enormous uptick in usage and in sales, because that's the way students in the K-12 market are starting to find or search for information. So the ability to use Google and to incorporate and save their search within our content, within our product, has really driven our sales, really driven our ability to penetrate a market instead of taking away from it. I mean, we have a huge advantage in three companies here, is that we have a lot of scale, and it's very hard for new technology to break into this market if they don't have this scale. So in my mind, I see most of these companies as potentials to partner with us and to really drive penetration into the market, because alone, I don't think they're particularly effective. nor us alone are particularly effective, and it's really how we partner with these companies and discover them. So in the last year, I mean, we've all purchased companies that help we see doing that. We bought Learning Objects, which is an institutional platform. We bought EWA, which is Enhanced Webassign, which is essentially a platform for the sciences. None of these content platforms have content, but they have really, really good engines that allow you to develop learning objectives and to provide better outcomes. So for us, it's how you pair with those companies. And you know, of course, there's always a threat, but that's the business. I mean, I'm sure taxi cabs wish they had been better before Uber came along. But Uber's success isn't because there's some wild new idea. They just have managed a distribution channel. We still get in a car and go somewhere and get dropped off somewhere. It's just more efficient and the cars are cleaner. So that's what's been the effect there.
So thank you. So one of those things, like Jim, you rightly mentioned, is the partnership model. Now there are other kinds of partners that you use, partners, and this is really a representative question from the vendor community. There are a lot of them over here who are listening to you and would like your take on this. As this whole transformation takes place, I mean, you're reorganizing internally, but also it's important perhaps to hear what do you expect your partners in terms of what skills do they need to bring to the table? I mean, is there any expectation that you would kind of broadly describe to the community here?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key changes I think in Macmillan is a shift from trying to build everything ourselves to licensing and becoming more of a configurator of best in breed than trying to originate. And so we seek partners like many along this aisle, including LearningMate, and we enter into licensing agreements and service agreements because they have capabilities that can quickly snap in to our platform and help us meet those requirements that the market is voting for with their dollars.
No, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I think there's some common themes that the three of us, just being on this panel, can really recognize. In that you can't build it all, you can't buy it all, and certainly the customers we've served don't want us to. In the end of the day, they want us to leverage best-in-breed technologies, as you know, as we just talked about. And I think it's really important going forward because, again, if we really follow the customer and what the user is consuming and how they're delivering, how we're delivering better outcomes, that will tell us where we need to up our technology game and what's happening, what's being built, what's being developed. We know what we're good at. So as publishers, you know, we do deliver content, we serve our customers in various ways, but we are not going to do everything. And so I think where partners can come in is really building those technologies that can plug and play into our ecosystem, and certainly can also plug and play into the open standards ecosystem, as I mentioned, you know, in terms of learning management systems and so forth. So I actually think it's a really good time for us to partner more than ever, and certainly we're very open to that.
Yeah, there's really nothing else. The only thing I'd say is one of my biggest frustrations with vendors is, and I always say this, I really like it when vendors come and want to know what I'm doing and then tell me how they can help me versus having a vendor come and tell me what they do. To me, that's not very useful, and I get lots of vendors who do that. They'll come in, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. I've set up a once a year now where I meet with all the vendors. We actually walk them through our strategic plan, and then we ask them to go away and come back and tell us how they're going to contribute to it. You would be surprised how few of them ever come back. They come, they listen, there's lots of smiles and nodding, they go away and they don't come back, because for us, we're going to find those third-party partners, just like my colleagues here. We're going to use them to create content, we're going to use them to make the process faster, we're going to use them for digital skills, and we need partners who align with our strategy and can really respond to that. So I always say to the vendor community, just like I would to a sales rep, listen to what your customer wants and provide that service versus telling them what you can do. And for us, that's our biggest frustration, because boy, we could use a lot of partners, and we've ended up using one or two vendors more than others for that very reason. They've really been able to come back with very clear objectives of how they can help support what our strategic goals are. So I really urge the vendors to do that, as you would urge any customer.
So this is a panel discussion. I'd like to invite any questions from the audience. Rather than, I have one question, but I'll hold that back if I have the time. But if there's anyone from the audience who would like to ask something, I mean, please feel free, raise your hand, and I'll get the mic to you. Right there, the gentleman there.
Hi, I just asked a question. This morning the headline was not Pokemon Go, but Pokemon Gone, about the massive drop-off in users of the app over the last month or so. So I was just wondering, how do you avoid fads and trends and things that are trendy rather than things that work well in the classroom?
So for us, we're very focused on learning outcomes. So we try and tie all of our development structure to how does it help drive the learning outcome. So while we haven't been building Pokemon Go, we've been looking a lot at gaming because all of the pretty in-depth research we've done in the last 2 years averages about a 30 to 40% increase in learning, better learning outcomes and of retention by using gaming. So for instance, we're releasing a whole new developmental math product. It'll come out in January, built around the concept of gaming. And so far we've had about a 35% higher retention rate in terms of the content. People love it. And so while we think we're not trying to be trendy, we're just trying to find what is the best learning outcome. And if it's something that ties to be trendy or not, we'll do it. But for us, it's really about what drives the best learning outcome. Because that's, our experience is that's never trendy. If you can demonstrate to an instructor by using your product, you're going to get a 30% better learning outcome and better retention, which is important to them and important to their provost, then that's going to drive your business. So, I don't know, we're not particularly very trendy. You can look at me and see that. But we watch those trends. We see things like Pokemon Go. What does it mean, and how does that become a learning tool? And so that's how we respond.
Yeah, I would say as publishers over the years, you really could see where publishers were starting to follow some trends and where that didn't work. You know, adaptive learning. We've been talking about adaptive learning for many years, and when you actually study the usage on some of the technologies we built, students actually weren't ready for it. And so again, if you go back to that kind of rigorous product design methodology that you have, where you're looking at, research, you're looking at customer data, usage data, that will keep you, kind of on the long-term sustainable track. Because one of the things we don't want to do is, again, build something, spend the time on it, and our customers aren't going to use it. It's just not going to do any of us any good, certainly the partners that we serve. So I think it's being very laser focused on that product development life cycle and ultimately looking for something that's going to have sustainability.
Yeah, I go back to your comment about over-engineering, and I think the market has largely over-engineered the product. But we've also had good pilots with gamification in primary segment, and we see our utilization increasing. I would say the key part, whether you're delivering it through normal interactives or whether you're delivering it through gamification, is the instant feedback. A student can tell immediately whether they're grasping the concepts and whether they're performing or whether they need intervention. And for them to be able to do that on their own is where the digital value often lies.
Any more questions from anyone? It's a lady here.
Hi, you mentioned earlier that you're using Google search, so I'm wondering how do you get around the customization and personalization that Google search usually does? That seems like not a smart thing for a student who wants to find something.
So what we've done is we've allowed it within our platform to save a Google search. So it enables them to go directly to their Google account to enter versus go through our front door to enter. So once they've signed into Google, we give them authentication because we know that password into the actual our product, and that allows them to maintain their Google search and all their resources on Google. and then access directly into our platform versus the other way. A lot of people have been they sign into our platform, then you authenticate, then you go to Google. But we know that about 75% of all student research or learning starts with a Google search. And those people, because of those students, all are authenticated through their school, and they sign in through their school. So it just allowed us to carry it that way. So we don't have a privacy concern. We don't have to worry about, are we sharing secret information, or are they thinking, because if they're going through Google and authenticating into what we're doing.
Final question that I just wanted to ask is 5 years into the future, all this investment that we are making today in digital technology platforms, return on investment, I mean, in terms of where do you see print and digital, what are the ratios of the revenues, how fast will it grow, any insights that any of you can share on this?
I think there will be a greater utilization of the digital product over time. I think it depends on the segment you're in. So we're in education, K through 12 performs differently than university or higher ed, performs differently than language learning. And it depends on the market you're in. You're going to get more traction in mature markets. You're going to get slower traction in developing markets. And then the final part is you got to really pay attention to the economic outcomes of these countries, because when a territory like Brazil goes into a deep recession, their expenditure that they can put towards any instructional materials is under pressure. And two things can come from that. They can try to force more digital into the classroom, or they call it back, right? And so you have to look at the economics of these territories.
Yeah, and just from a strategic planning perspective, we often work on a 3-year cycle. Most companies do, 3 to 5 years, and we've even talked about the need for doing that annually at a more rigorous pace, just because the market is changing so quickly. We talked about we're in a blended learning environment. Students are using digital tools, but they also still want print. That puts us in a tough place, right? Because we have to have the infrastructure to deliver print, but we have to find efficiencies so we can do that economically that works for everybody, but we also have to keep accelerating the digital transition, because students are native digital experts, right? Every new class that graduates from high school going into higher education, they are going to be more digitally savvy. And so it will shift. It will definitely shift. And it's how we balance that infrastructure that's required to still deliver print while we're accelerating that digital education strategy. But ultimately, we know where it's going in the next 3 to 5 years, but it will change, it will evolve, it will iterate on an annual basis.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely moving that way. Digital usage is up substantially. Print continues to become less and less important. And I think the other thing that really drives it is price. We've had lots of situations where we'll be at a school where we'll have 25, 26 MindTaps, which is our platform, adopted, and work out institutional pricing with them. And what we see is the first year, 50% of the students buy print and they buy digital. By year 3, it's less than 10% who are buying print, because they're really buying into the fact that the price differential is so great, and they actually are comfortable. Most of the resistance comes from the instructor, who's not really make that leap. So for us, it's really providing that digital experience, the entire digital experience, and as John says, being patient with the infrastructure, because it will eventually catch up. And every year, all 3 of us are seeing a greater digital penetration. And eventually, that line will cross where there's real growth. And I do think price is a big, we're an industry that has in many ways cooked our own goose. Our pricing has been so extreme that we've encouraged the rental, the used book market, and students are looking for quality materials. It's how you price them and how you provide them and what you can afford to do. And I think that's really driving digital growth and penetration as well.
So I think we are up to the time that we had with all of you. I want to thank all of you, all 3 of you again, for spending time and agreeing to be on this panel. I hope all of you enjoyed this discussion, and thanks again for getting here. So thank you so much.